our chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to add my condolences as well to those expressed by my colleagues of the family, loved ones and friends of the lost soldiers. And General Cavoli, from the home state of the first Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, I'd like to extend our congratulations and gratitude to you for your service, and would just note that we have had an unbroken line of American leadership at the top of NATO from its inception, and I, for one, expect and hope that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. But we are engaged in I'll call it a public rethinking of America's role in the world. Everybody in this room certainly spends their lives, their careers, their talents focused on this at a granular and strategic level every day, but because we've been effective at that for so long, many Americans have not had to engage in those discussions out and about, and their support is critical as we make the decisions that move us ahead. So with that in mind, General, I'd like to ask a couple of questions that are intended to inform the public discussion, not only the particularized discussion. Can you talk for a bit about the level of importance, the nature of importance of continuing to have a heavy ground presence on the European continent in terms of our security planning going forward, whether it's armor, infantry, or otherwise?
Sure, sir. So the alliance, we collectively require a heavy ground presence. That is specifically to be able to overcome that singular Russian advantage of being able to put its forces on our borders as an alliance before the initiation of hostilities. That causes a time-space problem for us in terms of reinforcing. So the positioning of this large force has to be appropriate to the situation, right, to the level of threat. Whether that ground force comes from America or someplace else is really, SACEUR doesn't care as long as it functions. There are some capabilities that the U.S. is very careful to make sure we continue to contribute because they're exquisite and in some cases unique, and we understand that, and those will have to be there all the time otherwise. So the question is, what is the preponderance of U.S. versus other nations' heavy ground force that is committed? That's something we balance all the time, and that's something that will change as our European allies pick up the capabilities targets we've just assigned them in the NATO defense planning process and commit the money that they've devoted in a profitable and a productive acquisition program to get the stuff they need.
Thank you, General. And at risk of sounding like I'm reading from the history books, I'm old enough to remember Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, and if my memory is correct, it was our ability to rapidly move the 7th Corps from Europe to the Middle East that allowed us to launch Desert Storm with the rapidity that we did. Can you speak a little bit, your point about whether there are American heavy ground forces or European allies in Europe, how does having American heavy ground forces pre-deployed in the European theater affect our planning and our ability to respond to American interests in the Middle East or in other proximate areas outside of Europe immediately?
It's fundamental to it, sir. There are three principal components of it's important to us: access, basing, and overflight. So our ability to base our forces someplace and to have the ability to access those forces to deploy them, and then to have the agreements to overfly nations. All of those things happen. They're usually based on pretty deep relationships. If you want it to be there when you need it, it's got to be, you have to have prepared for that moment. So those three things, access, basing, and overflight, are really a shorthand way of saying that gives us the ability to put forces forward in readiness, waiting to be deployed. Now, to what extent do we need to do that? That's largely a policy question, but that is the strictly military advantage of having forces forward for our own purposes. We do deploy them all the time. We've been, you know, leaning toward and then backing off of non-combatant evacuation operations throughout the Mediterranean area for a couple of years. We provide forces on short notice to General Kurilla to be able to use in Central Command. I could go on, but I think I hope I've answered your question.
Gentleman's time's expired.